I would like to thank Al Fawzan Award for Mosque Architecture for inviting me for this presentation on King Faisal Mosque in Islamabad. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation for easy understanding of the viewers, and I will go slide by slide so that you get a good picture of this beautiful mosque. Next, please. Okay, so this is a basic view of the Faisal Mosque, which is right under the Margala Hills. And these hills are they border the city of Islamabad. So right in the foothills of these hills is this white mosque against green mountains, which makes it stand out very much. Next, please. Now, this is the sort of a close-up of the master plan of Islamabad. Islamabad is a designed city which was designed by the Greek planner Konstantinos Doxiadis in early 60s. And it's a gridiron pattern plan. So the two important culmination points, or the axes, as you can see in the red and the blue. The red line, the red arrow culminates in a box, which is where the King Faisal Mosque is. And the blue arrow culminates in the axis where the presidency of the country is. Of course, presidency was placed here because in those days, Pakistan had the presidential system. So these two boxes that you see are the most important locations in the city of Islamabad. And one of them, which is the more important one, has been given to the King Faisal Mosque. Next, please.
Next, Sarah.
Okay, so it all started in 1966 when King Faisal of Saudi Arabia visited Pakistan and met the Pakistani President Ayub Khan. This is a historical picture from 1966. And in this visit, King Faisal committed to funding the Grand National Mosque of Islamabad. Now, in the master plan, this mosque was originally known as the Grand National Mosque of Islamabad. So it started in 1966, and when the funding came from the king, the competition was launched. Next, please. This is a very brief history of how it went. As in the last picture, 1966 was when King Faisal announced funding for the Grand National Mosque. 3 years later, an international design competition was held. And that competition was won by the Turkish architect Vedat Dalokay. There were approximately 43 entries from 17 different countries. And there was an international jury, and they selected Vedat Dalokay's design. 1975 was after the assassination of King Faisal. The Pakistan government named the Grand National Mosque as King Faisal Mosque to commemorate the late king and his support for the mosque. And at the same time, the main road, the access that I showed you in the previous slide, that main road was named Faisal Avenue. And till today, it's called Faisal Avenue. Next year, in 1976, construction started with the support of King Khalid, who had some sort of a contract with the government of Pakistan. And 10 years later, the Faisal Mosque was completed and opened to public. So this is a very brief history of how it went. Next, please. Now, 1969, as I said in the previous slide, was the competition held. And 43 entries, there were 43 entries from 17 different countries. Next, please. These are the original drawings of Vedat Dalokay that were retrieved from the archives of the Faisal Mosque. And of course, in those days, they were all manual drawings. So you can see the master plan and the plan of the mosque with the shadows. And he obviously the mosque is there, but there's a huge gardens around it, which are very geometric and sort of blend into the landscape. Next, please. That is the architect, Vedat Dalokai. He was a well-known architect when he won the competition, and later on he went on to become the mayor of Ankara. And while he was mayor, he tragically lost his life in a car accident. Next, please. So the concept in Dalokai's own words, it's a very interesting and a very simple concept. He says that I tried to capture the spirit, proportion, and geometry of Kaaba in a purely abstract manner. Next. Next, please. So it'll, please go back. I'll just go through what he said. Please go back a little, one slide. Okay, so from here, there are 3 or 4 drawings of how his concept evolved from a cube, whose inspiration he got from the Holy Kaaba, and how he transformed it into the shape of the Faisal Mosque. Next, please. So Dalokai writes in his, can you just go one slide at a time? Yeah. So Vedat Dalokai writes in his concept that imagine the apex of each of the 4 minarets as a scaled explosion of 4 highest corners of Kaaba. So there are 4 minarets of Faisal Mosque. He says, consider the top points of each minaret. And he says, thus an unseen Kaaba form is bounded by the minarets at the 4 corners in a proportion of height to base akin to Kaaba. The next drawing is going to explain this concept. No, next one, please. Okay, he says, now if you join the apex of each minaret to the, sorry, I can't see properly, to the base of the minaret diagonally opposite, a 4-sided pyramid shall be bound by these lines at the base within that invisible cube. Next, please. Please go back. Okay. So this is what he said. He said, if you connect the opposite corners with diagonal lines, so the top 4 corners represent the top of the minarets, and where all these lines intersect is right in the middle of the cube. And he says that this is how the bottom pyramid, so there are 2 pyramids formed. One is at the bottom and one is inverted at the top. So he says the bottom pyramid forms the body of the mosque, and the verticals that we see in the cube are the minarets. Next, please. The lower level pyramid is treated as a solid body, while 4 minarets with the apex complete the imaginary cube of Kaaba. Next, please. So he solidified the bottom pyramid that forms the shape of the mosque. And next, please. And this is how the imaginary cube is formed. So it's sort of a extracted form from a cube, but the image is from a cube, but it's sort of carved out of it. But the 4 minarets form it. Now these are 90 meters by 90 meters on all sides. It's a 90-meter cube. Next, please. Now, this was the concept, which was a very similar, but at the same time, why this mosque is so special is because it is also a structural engineering feat, in my opinion, because the structure is so simple and so simplistic, yet so powerful. So what the architect did was, he says that there are 4 twin beams emanating from the base of each minaret and joining at the summit. As you can see in this picture, you can see on the right, you can see a heavy minaret, and you can see 2 parallel beams. Well, they're not parallel, but 2 beams going straight up at the top. So from each minaret, these two beams each come out and they go and join at the top. And at the top, they are tied. Next, please. And at the top, they are tied with a giant waffle slab in a crisscross pattern. So there are 8 beams they go up, and at the top they are tied with this slab. So that is the entire structure. 8 beams held together at the base by the minarets and held together at the top by this one slab. That's it. Rest of it is all form like the slabs or the roof. But the structural system is just this. So it's very simple. And of course, if you see in this picture, you can see that why he used twin beams, because between those twin beams, he's put in windows which bring in top light. And from the history of mosques, especially the Ottoman mosques, mostly originally designed by Mimar Sinan and others, we see the importance of top light, because top light was also considered as divine light. Of course, this concept was also in Christianity, where churches also had top light. So the top light was generally considered divine in Christianity and also in Islam. And Ottomans used the concept of top light a lot. So that is exactly what Vedat Talukai also used, bringing in top light from between those twin beams. Next, please. This will give you a clearer picture of the twin beams and how light is coming from them. You can see on the left and the right those twin beams going up. You can also see the waffle slab which is holding those beams together at the top. Next, please. This is again his original drawing, the section. You can see it's all made in pencil, and the hills behind are also very sketched well. Next, please. This is also his original drawing, which he had submitted in the competition. Again, a pencil sketch showing the elevation. And in this elevation, again, you can see those beams emanating from the minarets and going up and at the top and being joined there. Next, please. That's a real picture of the elevation of how it looks today. And you can see, I'm sure the architects or the engineers who watch this presentation can see the simplicity of the structure and how the minarets are used as columns, actually. Columns, or rather used as dead weights to hold those beams together and hold them from collapsing. So they're used as dead weights. And let me make a little connection here, that this concept of using a minar as a dead weight was used by Mimar Sinan in Hagia Sophia, because Hagia Sophia was, after earthquakes, it was sort of crumbling from one side. So 2 extra minarets in Hagia Sophia, if you look closely, the 2 thick ones, they are thicker than the originals. They are actually dead weights used by Mimar Sinan so that it doesn't collapse or doesn't slide out from one side. So that is a similar concept Vedat Talukai used here, to put 4 dead weights on 4 corners to hold the shape together. Next, please. Now there's a little bit of geometry here also. Now these beams, they are at an angle of 45 degrees from the base. So if we stretch these beams and take them farther away, next please. So those beams will go and touch the top of the opposite minaret, forming an exact 45 degrees angle. I think there's a misprint in the slide. Basically, this is 90 meters in horizontally and 90 meters vertically. The 100 is a misprint. So it's a 90-meter cube. Next, please. Now, the influence of Faisal Mosque on originally the city of Islamabad and then overall on the country, entire country, has been immense. As you can see on the left, this is the official vehicle automobile number plate issued by the government of the city of Islamabad, and that carries the image of Faisal Mosque. So every car in Islamabad has this kind of a plate. On the left, you can see the image of the mosque. It says Islamabad, and on top of is the logo of government of Pakistan, and then on the right is the number. And in the right picture, this board is on the main motorway, which is coming from Lahore and going to Peshawar. So just when it reaches the interchange, which leads you to Islamabad, this is the board, which says, "Welcome to Islamabad, the capital city." And the Faisal Mosque is there because Faisal Mosque represents Islamabad now. Next, please. On a slightly more lighter note, these two pictures I had taken in different cities a few hours outside of Islamabad. In the left one, you can see that some enthusiast has made a room which looks like the Faisal Mosque. So he's put in a sort of a similar roof and 4 minarets. And on the right, you can see it's a water tank. So this is a commercial building, and somebody decided that his water tank needed to look like Faisal Masjid. So this kind of shows the influence of Faisal Mosque on the vernacular mentality or the vernacular thinking of people, because they sort of relate to it as a mosque which is our own. So this kind of little symbols are all over the country now. Like maybe 20 years ago, they were restricted to the city of Islamabad, but now they've started going on, and the mosque is now, it's literally a symbol all over the country. Next, please. Okay, before we start that, now I would like to add here that all was not so well when the mosque was completed, because it was it was an unorthodox mosque. It was a different kind of a design. And why I say different, because in the common vocabulary of a person on the street, a mosque has a typical form. A mosque, people believe, has to have a dome, and it has to have arched entrances or arched windows. So somehow these symbols have seeped into people's mind, and people have started associating them with either the religion or with the mosque. So initially, when Faisal Mosque was completed, a section of the society did not like it, and they sort of rejected it. They said it does not look like a mosque. So there was some sort of a debate, maybe not on a national level, but on a local level, of what a mosque should look like or what a mosque can look like. People who preferred modernity, they said that this mosque perfectly fits the modern city of Islamabad, whereas the traditionalists said that we don't accept it. Now, there's a little background to it more, which is important to understand, that when Islamabad was formed, it was formed on principles of modernism. Gridiron pattern was a principle of the modern movement. And when the public buildings were built, a lot of foreign architects were invited to Pakistan, to Islamabad, including Louis Kahn came here, and Marcel Breuer was here, Gio Ponti came. So a lot of Western architects came here because Pakistan didn't have too many architects. So the guideline, I mean, all these were modernist people, but somehow the managers of the city, they told every foreign architect that we want our public buildings to be Islamic. Obviously, they did not clearly specify what they meant by Islamic. They just said we want to Islamize a building, or we want Islamic architecture, without actually knowing what it actually meant. So some of the architects did not quite agree with that. And eventually, an American architect by the name of Edward Durrell Stone, he got some big projects here, like the Parliament building, the presidency, and the university. And his original design of these buildings had arched windows, and like it's a completely modern building, and then one can see that he's pasted arches on it and he's put a dome on it, and it was approved. But later on, the international jury that came, they thankfully they had those things removed. So I'll continue with this later because I have to show you a contrast. Next, please. So 1976, the construction started. There are some photographs of the construction. Next, please. This is the minaret coming up. And as I explained in the structure, first they built the minarets because this was supposed to be the dead weight. And once the minaret was built, then they pulled out the beams. Next, please. Here you can see those two beams now emanating from the minarets. And they all 8 beams, 2 each came, and then they were connected on top. Next, please. Yep, this is the steel of those beams. You can see how heavy they are because they carry the entire mosque structure. Next, please. Okay, so 1986 is when the mosque was completed and open to public. Next, please. This is a view of the mosque from one of the courtyards, and the capacity of the mosque is considered as 300,000, which of course includes all the courtyards. And I don't have an exact figure of the amount of worshippers this mosque can take inside the hall, but I believe it's 60 to 70,000. There's another aspect. Dr. Hani, do we have some more time?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I want to explain, I want to make another connection of this mosque. Now, if we analyze mosques all over the Islamic world, there are different typologies. Like, for example, in Southeast Asia, it's very difficult to see mosques with a dome, because dome was basically a structural system to span large spaces. Symbolism aside, it was basically a structural system. And the dome came to this part of the world, to South Asia, from Central Asia, and from Iran. So the kind of domes that were built in Pakistan were called onion domes. And they were not structurally very strong. They were not meant to span large spaces. I think the only place where large spaces were covered with domes was Turkey, because Turks, after conquering Constantinople in 1453, they learned the structural systems of the Byzantines, and specifically the Hagia Sophia. Now, Hagia Sophia was a masterpiece, a feat of engineering in those days. And when the Turks captured Constantinople, Hagia Sophia had been there for almost 900 years. And Ottoman architects and engineers, they studied Hagia Sophia in detail. They studied its structural systems. They studied how they used buttresses, how they calculated the lateral thrust of the dome, and how they made such huge domes. It's interesting to know that Ottomans kept trying to make mosques with domes larger than Hagia Sophia, and it took them a good over 100 years to actually achieve that. which was probably done in the Selimiye Mosque, which was right at the end of Sinan's life. But they just could not make a dome bigger than that. But one other thing that they learned from Hagia Sophia was the feeling of openness and the height. So the space inside Hagia Sophia is a very huge, large space. And that is what the cathedrals or the churches in those days used to have because of certain concepts that come from Christianity about the status of man in front of God. And Ottoman mosques sort of borrowed that concept from Hagia Sophia. So all the grand mosques that were built during the Ottoman Turkish period, such as the Blue Mosque or the Suleymaniye Mosque or the Selimiye Mosque, they're all very high and they're all very huge inside. And they have a space where once you enter, you feel like you're inside a huge space. Now compare that with mosques if I compare them with mosques in Pakistan, which come from Mughal architecture, they don't have large spaces. They've got a combination of little spaces added together. They're not very high and they're not very wide. And that is probably because they did not have the technology to build large spaces. And I think I can say the same for Southeast Asia. I can say the same for Africa, and also for other parts of the Islamic world. So I think what the Turks got was from the structural engineering technology from the Byzantines. Now, why I've given this background is that the feeling of space inside Faisal Mosque is the Ottoman kind of a feeling. It's very wide and it's very high. And once you enter, you feel you've lost. And it's in sheer contrast to all the historical mosques that we have in Pakistan, which I said earlier, have small spaces, not very high. So you can feel that it's designed by a Turkish architect just because of the feeling of space inside, which comes from their Ottoman past. Next, please. Okay, this is the last item. I think there are two more slides. I had mentioned this before, and I'm going to wrap it up again here. Next, please. Okay, so the irony is, as I mentioned before, that the bureaucrats of 1960s, when Islamabad was being built as a new capital city of Pakistan, the bureaucrats wanted all major public buildings of Islamabad to be designed in so-called Islamic architectural concepts and traditional design. And they kept insisting this to all the foreign architects that came to Islamabad. Next, please. But here comes the irony that when it came to the only religious building of the city, the Grand National Mosque of Islamabad, it was designed as a modern building with a clear departure from traditional and so-called Islamic mosque designs. So this sort of completed the cycle that Islamabad was designed as a modern city on modern concepts. And then these government people came who said, we want Islamic looking buildings or Islamic architecture here. And they kept insisting for 10, 15 years. But when the time came to build the religious building of the city, it was designed in a completely modern form. And now, of course, that same building has become a symbol of the city. So I think we've come full cycle, starting from Konstantinos Doxiadis, the Greek planner who built the city in a modern lines, to a modern mosque, which is now representing not just Islamabad, but the entire country. And it's a modern mosque. So it's not what we would call Islamic architecture in the common man sense of the word. Next, please. This is the last slide. This is a nice view of the mosque. It's taken from one of the pergolas in the courtyard, and you can see a very interesting axis here. So this mosque, being very geometric, is based on a lot of axes and vistas, and if you look closely, you can see that these are fair-faced columns from the brutalist era. It's all very, it's from a very modern, it represents the era of modernism. And that is what the interesting irony is. I think that's the last slide. So I would like to thank everyone. And thank you. And Dr. Hani, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Hamad, for presenting us this unique mosque, actually. And of course, as any other important architecture worldwide, there is always stories behind the walls. And if you allow me to ask, I know that there were a lot of debate about the form, the architectural form of the mosque, but why it lasted like 10 years in construction? Is it because of that debate?
Sorry, come again, sir. Was it because of?
Is it because the debate happened about the form of the mosque and people were rejecting, including the local administration of Islamabad?
So I think the delay was probably because of the tragic assassination of King Faisal, because he was the biggest supporter of this mosque, and he completely funded the mosque entirely. So I think after his assassination, the whole process stopped. And then I think after a few years later, King Khalid restarted the process. So there was a few years lost in between.
So it has nothing to do with any, let's say, a kind of philosophical debate about the form of the mosque.
So yes, the debate was there, but no, the debate did not entirely affect the start of the project, because the debate did not really leave the city of Islamabad. It was sort of a local debate. And I'm sure if this was happening in the age of social media, then probably the debate would have been nationwide. But the debate was not very influential in those days.
And I have another question. Who was the jurors of this competition?
That's a very important question, and so unfortunately, I don't have that information, but I would love to know. It was an international jury. That much I know.
I see. And I read a description or a kind of a narration about the form of the mosque. You were talking about the box and the inspiration from Kaaba, but on some of the references, it says that it is the design of a typical Bedouin tent, and that has nothing to do with the cube.
I believe I have read it also, but sir, I believe that is more of a myth created by the onlooker, because I think people who looked at the mosque, they resembled it to a Bedouin tent, but I have not seen any evidence of that, because I've actually read the concept of Vedat Talukai in the archives, and it was not a Bedouin tent. And secondly, I feel that logically also a Bedouin tent would probably not suit in Pakistan, because we don't have that kind of culture. It might suit the Middle East more. If this mosque was in Middle East, a Bedouin tent would be a good analogy. So I think that's more of a layman's understanding of the mosque.
Yeah, I would imagine this, because the narration of the cube and the Kaaba is more convincing, especially when you show to us the sketches that architect Vedat has done. And at the same time, to be honest, most of this narration of the Bedouin tent, I read them on the international media, which means they are trying to downgrading this strong design and the strong effects of this mosque in the 70s and late 60s. So I think they were trying somehow to downgrade the architectural form and the mosque itself. But when I go through the let's say the Islamic narration, I would read more about the concept of the cube and the influence of Kaaba on design, and it is more convincing. Now I have another question. On some references, I read that the mosque could house 10,000 prayers or worshippers. Another reference I read is 30,000 worshippers. So, and you were saying 30,000 to 60,000. So those are huge numbers that almost double or maybe triple the figures that we have. And of course, this will have a kind of implication on the design itself. So what is the true number of the worshippers?
So the true number of worshippers in the entire mosque is approximately 300,000, as I said, but that includes all these courtyards and the neighboring areas. But I think the main mosque itself under the roof is probably 50, 60,000. I don't exactly have a figure because we don't have these statistics published anywhere. So I think this is also a sort of an estimate. But 300,000 is a quoted figure, which is quoted in a lot of places, but that includes the outside.
I see. Now, when architect Vidad Dalokai did this, did he mean by any mean that to have this design to be as a symbol or a brand of the city of Islamabad?
No, not at all. Not at all. He did not. I'm sure he never could imagine that this would become a symbol of Islamabad. You see, there's another thing about Vidad Dalokai, that he was, during those days, it was the era of Cold War. And his leanings, he was a leftist. His leanings were toward communism. So he was not, even in Turkey, people were not too happy about the fact that a communist leaning person is designing mosques. And that somehow trickled to Pakistan also. And I'm sure if the jury was not an international jury, and if it had been a local jury, this mosque would never have been selected. So I don't think Vidad Dalokai ever imagined in his lifetime that his design would become the symbol of the capital of the city initially, and then all over the country, symbol of the country. And now people love it. I've yet to come across anyone recently who does not like this mosque. So people have sort of, the mosque has grown into people's hearts now.
Now, if you look in details about the construction, about the finishing of this mosque, also I would see that the contractor was so talented in casting this type of slabbing, especially with those details for lighting and for minarets. Is the contractor was Pakistani?
Yes, contractor was Pakistani. It was awarded to, it was actually given to a government contractor firm, which was a public sector construction firm. And they undertook the construction. And they did a good job out of it. Like this entire surface that you see on top, it's all white marble, pure white marble. The entire surface is covered with that. And another interesting thing, which maybe we can't see in this picture, the triangular facade that you see, all four facades are different. So they have a very slight difference in design. I'm sure usually people who go there, they can't tell the difference, but as an architect, if you look at them, they all have different design. So it's all done in concrete and marble. Very few materials are used.
I see. Now, is this mosque has been awarded for any awards, architectural awards?
We don't have too many architectural awards in Pakistan, so I don't think it has been given an award here. I don't think, I don't know why it has not gotten an Aga Khan award. And of course, Al Fawzan award starts from 2000, so the mosque doesn't qualify. But I think this mosque deserves some awards for its design.
I read that this mosque took the award of Aga Khan, but I don't.
No, sir, I don't think so. I don't think this mosque got the Aga Khan award.
It is here on the on some of the references that mentioned that it took the Aga Khan award, but no clue about the year of this award. And also I read some of the famous architectural critique like Keshwar Razvi. She wrote something about this mosque in her book, The Transitional Mosque, and I believe that it was a remarkable work that everyone talks about, the changing in mosque forms and mosque designs, always quoting King Faisal Mosque as a reference for this.
I have not read her article, sir. But yes, now Faisal Mosque is actually a barometer. It is a standard by which most architects who design mosques, small or big, they sort of keep Faisal Mosque as a standard and design. They start from there, just like the Ottomans kept Hagia Sophia as a standard and designed all the mosques from there. And of course, one major influence that Faisal Mosque has had, that in the last maybe 20 years or so, the mosques that are being built in Pakistan, they don't have domes. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of architects are experimenting without domes. Probably 30 years ago, that would have been a very difficult thing to make because culturally it was not accepted. And that is what, in the days of Faisal Mosque, that is what the debate was. But now, domeless mosques and modern mosques are actually becoming a trend in Pakistan. And most architects who are currently designing mosques, they are totally modern. So I think this mosque has had an influence in that also.
I see. Here we will come to the end of this conversation about King Faisal Mosque. It needs more than one episode to talk about. Especially, I have prepared many things, many questions to ask about it. And we have, an Al Fawzan Award for Mosque Architecture. We have a lot of literature about mosques, especially the architectural stories. And I wanted to share those ideas with you, but hopefully in next times and next occasions, we will be able to talk about it. I'm wondering if you would like to have something to add by the end of this conversation on this episode of Manabir al-Amara from Abdul Latif Al Fawzan Award for Mosque Architecture.
So before that, I would like to ask, are we taking any questions from people who are watching this or no?
Yes, if they have any. Sarah, would you please open the mics for our visitors? Actually, none of them has raised up any question. But again, we still have the chance to ask if they have any.
Yes, right. There's no one have any question.
Okay.
Okay. So before we log off, I would just like to show you a little paper. And Ms. Sarah, can we go back to the first or the second slide where we have a better view of the mosque?
Yeah, sure. 1 minute, please.
Maybe, yeah, this one is okay. Dr. Hani, if you just look at the roof of the mosque, you can see how it zigzags.
Yeah.
It is actually a square plan which has vertical and horizontal lines and diagonal lines. And then if you fold this slab in this way, can you see it, sir?
Yes, of course.
If you fold that along 8 lines, basically this is the roof of the Faisal Mosque. This.
Yeah.
And it comes, if you open it, it's a square.
Yeah,
So it's got one plus sign and one.
It is clear, yes. Yes, it is clear.
Yeah. And this roof, the edges of this square are supported by the minarets. Otherwise, it would go down. That is basically the concept, the structural system.
So maybe this is why they said it's a tent, because of the structural system.
Yes, yes. Of course, it looks like a tent. To a common man, it looks like a tent.
But even
like
so, structural system is a tent structural system.
Usually, tent structural system has a central pole in the middle, and on the sides, it's a.
It depends where the tent comes from.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, we would like to thank you again, Hamad, and looking forward to meet you again, either through virtual meetings or even actual real meeting very soon in Kuwait, hopefully, at the 3rd International Conference on Mosque Architecture. Of course, you will be joining us there. And also would like to thank our attendees who were attending this. Thanks for Sarah, who was managing and operating this episode of Manabir al-Amara. And we wish you all a blessed the last days of Ramadan and blessed breakfasting feast after less than 1 week. Looking forward to meet you again. Have a nice evening and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.